What's going on, everyone? Jack here from Half-Chrome. Today we're going to take a look at Betaflight. And if you just bought a drone, whether it's something like this long range or a tiny whoop, you're going to have to get it connected in Betaflight. Now, Betaflight will tell you a whole lot of information, will help you tune your quad, get it running the way you want to, and solve some problems if you have any. So let's take a look at Betaflight. How does it work, and how do I know that my drone's going to behave the way it's supposed to? First, you're going to have to download Betaflight. And if you downloaded anything before, it's kind of the same process. If you Google Betaflight, it's going to come up. Currently, the latest configurator is 10.7.0. So once I have it on my computer, I'm going to go ahead and plug my drone in. Now, most drones have a micro USB connector. Some, like this one here, actually has a USB-C connector. You know, just make sure you have the right cable and then plug it in. But before you do, super important, make sure no propellers on your drone. That's a safety thing. You don't want them spinning up and hurting somebody or flying off and breaking something, right? And the other is make sure that your video transmitter antenna is connected, right? If it's disconnected and you power on the drone, it could burn out your VTX or cause some damage, and your range won't be quite as good. So both my propellers are off and my antenna is connected. So I'm going to go ahead and plug my drone in. This is a micro USB connection, and we can see that the drone is starting to light up. We can also see on my computer, I see COM3. I'm going to go ahead and click connect. Now, the first thing I'm going to look at is this setup tab, and I can kind of see that the drone is performing correctly, right? So you can see that arrow. That is the front of the drone, and when I push the drone forward, it goes forward. When I pitch, it pitches, and when I yaw, it yaws correctly. If that's not correct, we've got some work to do. And it all kind of starts by making sure that it's your accelerometer is correct, right? So this one's kind of hard because the USB-C cable is on the bottom, but if I wanted to, I would place it on the table and recalibrate, and that should help things. If that doesn't help, well, there's some other things we need to look at. Now, you can see down here, the instruments, everything is behaving properly. And we're going to move to the next spot. That is the ports tab. Now, this ports tab is actually really important. You can see there are two UARTs on this drone. What does that mean? Well, that basically means I connect two different things here, right? So in this case, I could connect a receiver and I could connect smart audio. Smart audio lets me change the VTX channel with my goggles. Super convenient. But you can see there's actually no receiver on here. Why? Well, the receiver is actually built into this drone. But if I wanted to add a better receiver, a more long-range receiver, something like this, I could. And I can see that my UART1 is open. I could potentially add it there. And if I did, I'd turn my serial RX on, I'd solder it to the UART1, and I'd be good to go. All right, so what the heck is a UART? It's a port, right? And some drones have multiple. This one has two. So if I look at a flight controller, I can see that they're kind of labeled some sort of R and T labeling system, right? R means receive, T means transmit. So my UART1 is going to have an R1 and a T1. My UART2 is going to have an R2 and a T2, right? If I want something to receive information like a receiver, I'm going to put that on an R UART. Something that's going to transmit information like my VTX smart audio, I'm going to put that on a T UART. I can't mix my ones and twos, so once that port has been taken, I can't put anything else on it. If I'm going to put my receiver on one of these, I turn that serial RX on and it lives there. Now let's look at the configuration tab. Right, starting out here with this mixer, you can see that the props on this are reversed. Typically, these two front motors, they spin inward, right? They spin outward, so they're reversed. With tiny whoops, sometimes that's a little bit of an advantage. Some people like to do it this way, some people do it the other way. Kind of depends on you, right? But you can see this motor direction is reversed. If my quad was set up differently, it would look like that. You'll notice that my propellers on motors 1 and 4 spin the same direction as each other, and then the motors 3 and 2 also spin the same direction. We've seen that before. That's how drones fly, right? If we change that, it just wouldn't work. Over here on the ESC, you're not really going to worry about any of this stuff, or at least you shouldn't have to. You can change, you want pretty much the highest D shot that your ESCs can handle. Your manual will tell you. Now, if your board isn't behaving the way that it should, you can kind of change things here. Usually there's an arrow that tells you which way is the front. If you can't quite get it in that configuration, you spin it, then you're going to spin it here on this yaw axis, right? So actually, if you look at this one, my arrows are pointing to the back, right? So it's actually backwards. So what we've done is we set it up at 180 degrees, so it's just kind of rotated, right? Don't mess with the PID loops here, but generally this is going to be set up correctly. You kind of want the highest numbers you can get here for it to work safely, and don't mess with that. Arming angle is something that I would change. I almost always make it arm at 180 degrees. I think by default it's set at 25. So what that means is by default at 25 degrees, your drone will arm, right? So, but if it's tilted more than 25 degrees, it'll say, hey, no, it's not safe for it to take off, right? We can't arm. I put it at 180 degrees. That means if it's stuck in a tree, I can still arm it, shake it loose. It's kind of a safety feature that I override because, well, I want to be able to knock this thing out of a tree. So that's why I do that. Personalization, you can see I call my craft here half chrome, so that'll appear in the OSD. We'll get to that later. Camera angle, this kind of mixes a little bit of yaw in. Don't mess with that. Some tiny pilots like to deal with that, but probably not something you're going to worry about. Now here, this is important, right? If you buy a drone and you have to add a receiver, this is where you're going to work on that. Now, this is an SPI receiver, meaning it's built into the flight controller. So you can see my receiver mode is SPI RX support, FrSky D, right? That means it's 8 channels. If it was 16 channels, it would be FrSky X. So SPI receivers, it's one of these two. D is usually the safest, and then you bind it to your remote that way. Now, if I wanted to add a receiver, let's say I want to put this thing on here for better range, then what I would do is, chances are it's a serial-based receiver, S-Bus, and then I just kind of connect it to the UART that is open here, right? So UART, remember, it's going to be an RUART. I just have to find the number that's open and connect it there. But I don't have to worry about that because it's an SPI receiver and it's already built in. All right, kind of scrolling down here. A lot of these are things you don't really need to worry about. I do like to turn air mode on. What air mode is the propellers will always kind of have some spin going on, right? So if you're doing tricks, flips and rolls, and you cut the throttle all the way, the motors will still respond pretty quickly. So it just kind of helps you do some maneuvers. So RX lost and RX set here. What that is, RX lost, if my drone becomes disconnected from the transmitter, it'll just beep until I find it or disconnect the battery. And then RX set means I can put a switch on my remote where I flip it and then it'll start beeping. Super useful, helping you find your drone when you crash. All right, all this other stuff is just kind of turned on by default. You probably want it on there. And if you're changing anything, always click Save and Reboot. Now, battery and power, again, this isn't necessarily something you need to check, but you can. Now, this is kind of, if you're using your OSD, it'll help you understand when you need to land, right? So my drone will beep at me and tell me I need to land when I get to 2.9 minimum cell voltage. I actually think that's kind of low. We're going to put it at 3.2. That just, lets me know that my battery's getting low, and it's going to say, warning, warning, battery low, you should probably land. So that's really the only thing that you need to kind of look there. If your battery warning is going off all the time, you can, put that lower if you want to really drain your batteries. Not a good idea. About 3.2, when it starts to hit that, then you've really exhausted your battery. All right, so we're going to click Save. Now we're going to look at PID tuning. Now, if you are new to drones, do not mess with this. Let it just kind of go with the defaults, right? And this drone has already been tuned out of the factory, so I'm going to assume they know what they're doing. But there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, especially if you're flying whoops, that you may want to take a look at, right? Specifically, angle strength. That's how quickly it snaps back into place. I usually bump that up a little bit, usually close to about 100 or so. And then angle limit is also interesting because it limits how far forward that drone can pitch. So if you're flying in angle mode, you have to be in angle mode. At 60 degrees, my drone will pitch to about 60 degrees, which is pretty aggressive, right? Which means it'll go fast, right? If I don't want to fly aggressively, I can lower that angle limit to something like 30 degrees. My drone just won't go very fast, right? So if I'm learning, that's a good way to kind of limit the angle in your drone or the speed of your drone. Now, some of this other stuff is, kind of complicated and not really something we need to get into right now. Now let's look at the receiver tab. Now this is one of the most important tabs you need to understand. You're also going to need your radio. Now I've already bound this quad.
Welcome to OpenTX.
Okay, so I've already bound this quad to my radio, and you can see that it just changed the values. That's because it's recognizing the radio. So this is how I check to see that my receiver is bound correctly. I work the throttle up and down. I can see the throttle changes. I check the yaw is changing, pitch, and roll, and it's all behaving correctly. I can even check my switch, aux1, aux2, aux3, and aux4. Now I have to set all of this up on the radio beforehand, at least the aux switches I do in the mixer. We won't get into that right now, but this is to make sure that everything is behaving properly. Sometimes the channel map is set up incorrectly, right? Sometimes it's TAER 1, 2, 3, 4, and when I check the throttle, it's moving something different, right? If that's the case, then you just come over here to the channel map, go to FR Sky, and you hit save. You can also see that drone spinning out of control down here. If that's the case, check the channel map, right? And then click save, and boom, right?
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
Radio is just resetting here. But yeah, so now the drone is going to behave properly once again. All my sticks work. My aux channels are set the way they need to be. Okay, so now keep moving on. We're going to get to the modes tab. Now this is pretty interesting and super important. Now I set up all of my drones the same way, and this is just how I do it. These are some things and switches and things that are kind of my preference, and I would suggest you set them up for you as well. First is the arm. That's kind of like, your drone's not going to go if you don't arm it, right? So that's getting the motors to go. And I always put it on aux4 because I like it on the right side of my drone. When I switch it into this bottom position, the drone will arm, right? What I can do is I can move this slider, if I wanted it to be in the middle position, right? It would work there. But by default, my switches are always up. So I like it to be all the way down. Now my drone will arm and I can fly. The next thing I like to do is add some flight modes, right? Angle mode, right, is how you fly, is how I fly indoors. If you're flying a tiny whoop, that's something you're going to want to add for sure. It just kind of it adds an angle limit. It also will self-level. The self-leveling makes it a lot easier if you're bumping into things. And I have it, as you can see on this switch here, in the top position. If I wanted to add something to the middle position, I could, or the bottom position, but this switch will change how I fly. Now, if it's not in that top position, by default, it will fly in acro mode. That is full-on rate mode. That means I have full control. If I want to do flips and rolls, that is how I fly. So I just move it down into one of those second or third positions. Other modes you may want to consider are horizon. Horizon is a self-leveling mode, but you can still do flips. Or if you want to learn how to do acro, there's a mode called acro trainer. So let's say I wanted to add acro trainer, kind of learn how acro mode works. It kind of sets some limits for you. Click add range. Let's say I want to put it on this switch. It was in auto. I click it to aux3, and then I could put that in the middle position. So I acro trainer now.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
I saved it. So now I have acro trainer in that middle position. So if you want to learn acro, it's a great way to do that. Other things you want to add, for sure you want a beeper. So when I flip this switch in the bottom position, my drone will beep at me, right? That'll help me find it. Again, just click add range and then put it on the aux channel that you want. I don't want it in this top position because then when I turn my drone on, it's just gonna beep at me until I flip it down. So I flip it there. And then the last thing I suggest you put on your quad is flip over after crash, also known as turtle mode. And I put that on the far left switch. For me, that's aux 1. Again, your aux switches are kind of dependent on how you set up your radio, but again, I put it on that bottom one. So when I crash and it's flipped upside down, I disarm, I flip that down, I arm it, then I flip my quad, right? Then I flip it back, disarm, and then rearm, and then I can fly, right? So flip over after crash actually just reverses the way the motors spin so that you can push it up off the ground, right? So you get that the way you want and you save it and you're good to go. Okay, so we're looking at the motor tab here. If you're having problems with your motors, you can kind of diagnose some of that in here. In order to check your motors, you have to one, again, make sure your propellers are off. Do never do this with propellers, not even with something small like this. But when I check this button, that means my motors are going to spin. Okay, so now if I connect a battery, my motors will spin, and I can kind of just verify that here. I can also verify that I have the right motors, right? So motor 1 is this back right, motor 2 is this front right, motor 3, and motor 4. They all work, they all spin in the way that I want. Now you can see which direction they're supposed to spin, and it's actually kind of hard to see that sometimes. So a little tip is you spin the motor up and then grab a little piece of paper and you kind of let it hit and see which direction it moves, that little piece of paper. And then you can just verify that it's moving in the correct direction. Now, if it's not moving in the correct direction, you can reverse the motors in something called BL Heli. That's a different program. Or what you could do is just switch any 2 motor wires, right? There are 3, you switch 2, and it'll change the direction of the motor. Now let's look at the OSD tab. The OSD, or on-screen display, will show you different information while you're flying. You can kind of move it around, you can kind of add things as you want. There are some things that I suggest you add on there. 1, battery average cell voltage. The reason you want average battery cell voltage, then you don't have to do any conversions, right? So my cells, my batteries, I don't ever want them to get under like 3.2 cells. As I'm flying, when I rest, they should be at like 3.5, 3.6. That's kind of a good place to be. So if it's starting to get below 3.2, you gotta stop flying or you're gonna ruin your batteries. The reason I do average, if I'm flying a 2 or 3 or 4 or 6, then I have to kind of do some conversion in my head or just kind of know where that needs to be. But, if I just know 3.2, I'm good to go. Current battery draw will tell me the amperage coming out. That's a good thing to know, especially if you're trying different props and seeing how efficient or inefficient they are. Remember, more amperage means more power and less battery life. So if you want to try different propellers and see, is this more efficient, less efficient, you kind of watch that amperage drop. Plus, ESCs are rated at certain amperages. So for this one, for example, is rated at 5 amps. I want to make sure that I stay under 5 amps. On these 2 blade props, I'm getting upwards of 4, so that's kind of close to the limit. I'm thinking about putting tri-blades on here, but I'm kind of concerned that might draw too many amps, and then I blow an ESC and then I can't fly. You can kind of look down here at the different things you can put on, actually kind of like throwing a crosshair on there. Kind of helps me line things up. Craft name, I showed you how to change the name at the beginning. If you want your call sign or your name on there, you click that. Disarmed. You can kind of go through these and see what you want. RSSI value is important. And you can move these things around in the goggles and just kind of find a place that you find comfortable. Timers, throttle position. Do I want to see, how much throttle am I using? VTX channel is a good one. If you're kind of not sure, are you on the right channel? This is a good one to turn on. And of course, warnings you definitely want on. And these are the warnings that you can kind of throw on there. Battery warning. We do want ESC fail, core temperature. If you're flying hot days, that's a good thing to have. And then again, you're going to click Save. Black box is a little more complicated. We're not going to get into that. And actually, there are a whole bunch of other tabs. If you turn that Enable Expert Mode, other things you can look at, fail safe. We've got adjustments, servos, sensors, tethered logging. We're not going to worry about any of that stuff right now. And the last one is the CLI. And this is kind of like the interface of the drone. You can kind of type commands, you can kind of save, you can pull all the information off of here onto your computer through the CLI. With whoops specifically, you can bind using the CLI, which is super helpful. In order to do that, you have to know what version of Betaflight the drone is running, and then you kind of have to type in the bind code. So this one is 3.5.7. So to bind this one, I would type frsky_bind, and then it puts it into bind mode. So for Betaflight, so if you're running Betaflight 3. something, it's frsky_bind. If you're running Betaflight 4.0, you just type in bind. If you're running Betaflight 4.0. something, you're going to type in bind_rx_SPI. And then if you're running Betaflight 4.1, some version, or 4.2, some version, you're going to write bind_rx. Why do they have all of these for different ones? I don't know. Why can't they just type bind? Why can't that just be the command for all of them? That would make a whole lot of sense. All right, so once you've typed the correct command, then you go into your remote here, you get into the bind mode. That's different for all of them, so I'm not going to run through it. And then when the light changes color, you're good to go and you can fly. Hopefully this Betaflight tutorial was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the description down below, or shoot us an email at drones@halfchrome.com. We, of course, do have a Patreon, so if you're looking for more information, you want to support us, and we give away a drone a month, check out links in the description down below. And don't forget to check us out on halfchrome.com. Hey, good luck, everyone, and happy flying.